Right, but Douglas Murray, the essence of your argument when you made those comparisons between the number of Muslims in different countries, is it that we've got too much Islam in Britain?
Well, look, the answer that the Muslim Brotherhood and other extremist groups give is that the answer to absolutely everything is Islam. I think less Islam in general is obviously a good thing.
Really?
Because the Islamic world, let me finish, the Islamic world is in the middle of a very serious problem, and it has been going on since the beginnings. And I think that it is not worth continuing to risk our own security simply in order to try to be politically correct.
Yesterday, we spoke to Miqdaad Versi from the Muslim Council of Britain. While Mr Versi praised the response to the attack, he was critical of anti-Muslim sentiment, which he said could lead to this kind of violent Islamophobia. This is what he had to say.
We've talked very much about hate speakers being unacceptable, being non-tolerated, and now we know that BBC and many others will not have Anjem Choudary and others on the TV, despite having had them in the past. What about the same people on the right? What about the people like Douglas Murray, who just last week came on this show and said less Islam is the answer to terrorism? That kind of attitude within even the BBC, within the show like this, giving a platform to people like that to spread their hate is unacceptable, and we should be intolerant of that tolerance.
Right, well, that was Miqdaad Versi. Well, nobody from the Henry Jackson Society was with us for that discussion yesterday, but we are joined now by Tom Wilson, who is a fellow at the Henry Jackson Society Centre for the Response to Radicalisation and Terrorism. Welcome to the Daily Politics. You heard the comments made there. What was your response to what Miqdaad Versi said?
Well, I think it's unacceptable that people like Douglas Murray and those of us at the Henry Jackson Society who have been focused on trying to counter extremism, on countering extremist ideology of defending liberal values and democracy, that we should be equated with extremists like Anjem Choudary. It undermines the entire effort to combat extremism.
Right, except that Douglas Murray said, I think less Islam in general is obviously a good thing. He was drawing parallels a few weeks ago on the Sunday Politics when I interviewed him between the number of Muslims in other countries and the rate of terrorist attacks. Is that not hate speech?
No, I think, as you know from that programme, he was talking about the extremists and the radicals. He was there with Sarah Khan, where he said how much he backs the liberals, the moderates, the people like Sarah Khan.
But he also said they're in a minority and he didn't think that they would succeed, and therefore he didn't think more Islam was a good thing, which in some people's minds would sound like some sort of cleansing process.
I don't think, not at all. And at the Henry Jackson Society, we've been quite clear about combating a whole range of different types of extremism on the far right as well as among Islamists, and that's why we support the government's Prevent programme, focusing on tackling far-right radicalisation as well as in the Islamic community as well.
Do you, though, accept that his comments, Douglas Murray's comments, this about having less Islam, is inflammatory?
I don't think it was inflammatory, because I think what he was saying is if we look at this country where we have a large Muslim community and a wide spectrum of different beliefs, on the far end, on the most extreme end, there are problematic beliefs, and I think we would want a lot less of that kind of Islam, the Salafi Wahhabi interpretation, for instance. I think that's what Douglas has always focused his career on seeking to combat.
Right, except Digby Jones, if I read you the quote that he made in the original interview with me, Douglas Murray said, Eastern Europe doesn't have an Islamic terrorism problem because it doesn't have much Islam. France has the worst problem because it has the most Islam. Now, he doesn't say it's all to do with extremism. He is talking about Islam. Are we ever, he says, going to draw any lessons from this? Apparently not. Is he right, Douglas Murray?
Well, I think he forgot. I'm not saying he intentionally or didn't intentionally forget, but there was the word, you know, this country needs less fundamental Islam. I mean, that if he was talking about it generically, I think he's completely wrong, because you can't, at the end of the day, you don't want less or more Judaism, less or more Catholicism, less or more of any Buddhism or Hindu or Sikh. It's not that, is it? What it is that I think the Islamic community has to sort itself out better to deal with its own problem of fundamentalism. And statistically, if you've got large Muslim communities, almost statistically, by definition, you're going to have more extremism, simply because there'll be a percentage of their population, of their community. But it's not a function, it's a statement of fact. If you've got more of a certain type, you'll have more of the extreme of that certain type. But I don't think it's on to say that a nation needs more or less of a belief. What it does need is less of the damaging end of it, which is fundamentalism. And as you say, Joe, that could be the far right as much as it could be Islam.
Right. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think what was specifically so problematic about these comments was this equation with Anjem Choudary, who's a hate preacher, somebody who supports Islamic State, and who's currently in prison. Comparing somebody like that to somebody like Douglas, who tries to counter extremism, it is concerning that an organisation like the MCB, which has had its own problems in the past with links to extremism, should be trying to defame and silence those of us trying to combat this very problem.
Do you think that right-wing extremism is dealt with equally to Islamic fundamentalism?
Certainly in the government's counter-extremism strategy it is. They seek to combat the two ideologies in similar ways. But I think our national conversation hasn't focused as much as it could do on the far right and as it probably needs to, particularly as we have seen a rise in hate crimes against Muslims, as well as we've seen recently with this attack, the attack on Joe Cotts. It's a serious problem.
Right, and it's a serious problem which critics might argue, and maybe the Muslim Council of Britain would say, the government has taken its eye off the ball because of the focus, rightly, on Islamic extremism and fundamentalism. Do you think the Henry Jackson Society has played a role in that perhaps too much focus on one type of extremism and not on the other?
Not at all. We've produced research on the far right and particularly on countering the far right on campus, and we've also been very supportive of the government's strategy Prevent, which does focus on far right referrals as well as on Islamist ones, and we've said it's correct that they do both of those things.
Do you think in your mind they're treated equally by the authorities and in the public mind?
No. I was thinking about this morning, actually. There are many, many reasons. I mean, you know, one is more global than the other. I think that's fair to say. One has got a greater, bigger infrastructure than the other. And one is more in the public mind because there have been more incidences of terrorism caused by one than the other.
Right.
And that's factual. So the terrorism response tends to be guided to one because statistically there are more of it. But I don't think the public mind sees it in the same way. And I was thinking this morning, I'm going to forget his name, the guy in Norway who...
Yes.
Yeah.
Anders Breivik.
Right, well, that had nothing whatsoever to do with Islam, did it?
No.
That was all to do with far-right extremism and socialism, you know, and that was evil, disgusting, and that was nothing to do with Islam. So, and he murdered 60 or...
More, I think,
yeah.
actually.
Well, you know, that was just so utterly disgraceful, and that was nothing to do with Islam. So we have got to understand that there is, and of course, the more you have one, the more you have the other. And I think our society needs to understand that more. And I think France probably have the same problem.
All right.
For all the obvious political reasons.
Tom Wilson, thank you very much for coming in from the Henry Jackson Society.
This was something that it was bound to happen sooner or later. Unfortunately, we've been warning the Metropolitan Police, the Mayor of London, that the level of hatred that is being increased on a daily basis, it's very dangerous and it could lead to something like this. And it's very unfortunate to see it's happened, but I think we need to address above everything this level of hatred and the fact that we have got hate preachers now on our radio stations, be it Majid Nawaz or Katie Hopkins or Douglas Murray. They're bombarding our society with hatred towards the Muslim community and indeed towards mainstream Islam. And this cannot go on.
And is this rise in Islamophobia, is this something we've seen recently in the wake of the Manchester attack and Westminster and London Bridge attacks? Or was it increasing anyway, in your view?
Well, it's increasing all the time for a variety of reasons. But indeed, these incidents actually increase the association of violence to Muslims in many ways. One is these hate preachers. Secondly, the way that our society drags Muslims onto TV station to sort of condemn and so forth. So therefore, in the mind of ordinary people, this association between violence, atrocities and Islam and Muslim is being strengthened. And then, you know, all he needs is someone who's a slightly sort of not normal to come and behave like this.
At this time on Monday, we interviewed live a contributor who expressed the view that Douglas Murray was a hate preacher. Mr. Murray is Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a think tank which describes itself as working to counter extremism and to support liberal democracy. We'd like to make it clear that we were unaware that Mr. Murray would be named in this way and would like to apologise to him.